People very often mistake Bitcoin for the asset only, what we refer to as a cryptocurrency. But Bitcoin has three layers. It's the Bitcoin network. It's a public payment network that is collectively managed by voluntary stakeholders who are incentivized to do so with the Bitcoin token. So upon proof of work, proof of contribution to the network, you get rewarded with Bitcoin tokens that are minted upon this work that you prove that you performed for the network. So the paradigm shift is that we have a public infrastructure that is collectively maintained by incentivizing the individual. And this is a paradigm shift because it transcends the idea of capitalism versus communism. It unifies these both ideas, right?
We're here with Shermin Voshmgir. Hey, Shermin, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited to chat with you. I wonder if we could just kick off, maybe take a minute, introduce yourself, and what led you down the path of educating the world about Web3?
Yeah, that might be a longer story, but yeah, my name is Shermin. I think somebody at a party back in Berlin, in my Berlin days, I think it was 2014 or 15, told me about blockchain. And it was like late at night and we had a few drinks, but it sounded intriguing. I couldn't remember a lot of it. The next day was Sunday morning. I woke up and I'm like, wait a second, what did this guy talk about? And the only thing I could remember, how do you remember the word blockchain on your first? This is not a word that you remember. So the only thing I remembered was, wait a second, technology, Bitcoin. And then I started to Google and I didn't get out of the bed until late at night. So I like literally, it was like, holy shit, this is the answer to so many questions that I've had in my life. And then, yeah, at that time I had a different startup, very early stage boutique travel startup. And I realized that I need to pivot. I don't care. I need to pivot. It was too early stage to even sell it or hand it over to anyone else. And I'm like, it was 2015. Nobody had any information. Like it was hard to get information about blockchain. There were only technical, like you had GitHub repositories, you had a lot of technical information, you had a few videos of people explaining stuff. That was it. You didn't have any explainers. So as I was educating myself what this is, not only from a technological level, but what this could mean for the economy and society and politically, I started like sharing my knowledge with the world. And I registered the domain Blockchain Hub like within a week. And I was a Tumblr at first, where I shared media that I found to that topic, but very soon, within 2 or 3 months, it became a full-fledged website. And it was first just an online site. As I was educating myself, I was sharing that knowledge. And then it became an information hub, like a mini think tank in and around Berlin. There were so many meetups, everyone was there. I ended up having my offices in the Ethereum co-working space, where the Ethereum developers in Berlin were sitting. And yeah, like things just happened from there. Yeah. Wow. I just followed the white rabbit. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. And following your passion and curiosity. How long ago was that party in Berlin?
It was August 2015. And Blockchain Hub website was created in September 2015. And immediately I was trying to juggle like starting this Blockchain Hub website while I was still doing my other startup. And then I just stopped the other thing. I'm like, I have to decide. I can only focus on one thing. And I had the sunk cost fallacy around, I had invested already 1.5 years or 2 years into a startup that hadn't scaled yet. So I couldn't sell it. But I'm like, I have to ditch this. I don't care. It was the best choice.
Yeah, that's great. You've been on this journey now 8 years, and I'd love it if you could even just give our audience, most people are not even aware, what is Web3? What does it mean? You said even yourself just now is the answer to so many questions. Maybe just give us a brief overview of what Web3 is, are the most exciting elements of it that excite you?
Web3 has two kind of revolutionary aspects to it. On the one hand, it like reinvents, it's next generation internet. And why is it the next generation? Because of two things, because of what it changes in the back end of the internet and because of kind of its main application, which is the token or tokens and tokenization. So in the backend of the internet, it's revolutionary because blockchain networks as the backbone of Web3, and the first blockchain network was Bitcoin, reinvent the internet because they are a new collaborative way to manage data structures in the backend of the internet. Whereas the first generation, the second generation web, what we now refer to as Web 1 and Web 2, is a privately managed web where private companies or even NGOs or public entities manage the data of the users on private servers, right? Yeah. Data is privately managed on the server, which they control, whether it's a private corporation or even your government. You have no control over what happens with your data. And Web3 is different because data is collectively managed and there is much more institutional accountability about how data is managed. And there are no walled gardens of servers. So this is a paradigm shift because the first blockchain network was the Bitcoin network, obviously. And people very often mistake Bitcoin for the asset only, right?
Yeah.
What we refer to as a cryptocurrency. But Bitcoin has 3 layers. It's the Bitcoin network. It's a public payment network that is collectively managed by voluntary stakeholders who are incentivized to do so with the Bitcoin token. So upon proof of work, proof of contribution to the network, you get rewarded with Bitcoin tokens that are minted upon this work that you performed for the network. So security and transaction verification and general network security. So there is this physical peer-to-peer network, which is operated by people and institutions who run nodes in this network. The network operates according to the Bitcoin protocol, which is the computational constitution of this distributed internet tribe called the Bitcoin network, right? Yeah. And the currency of this distributed internet tribe or decentralized organization is the Bitcoin token. So it's a means to an end. And it was the purpose as well as the means to an end, right? So the idea was to have peer-to-peer electronic cash, but in order to be able to have peer-to-peer and electronic cash, the network contributors needed to be incentivized with something, which is Bitcoin, right? And obviously, this is very often too complex of a story. So general media very much likes to focus on the asset only and the changes in asset price, and very often omits the fact that it's the paradigm shift is that we have a public infrastructure that is collectively maintained by incentivizing the individual. And this is a paradigm shift because it transcends the idea of capitalism versus communism. It unifies these both ideas, right? Okay, we need public good. Payment networks should not be managed by private companies or central banks. They should be managed by the public. And how do we incentivize people to contribute to that public good? By paying them with a network token. And the network token in the case of the Bitcoin network is Bitcoin. And in the case of the Ethereum network, it's called Ether. And in the case of, for example, public telecommunication network like Helium, they have 2 different tokens. And in the case of, for example, a peer-to-peer social media network, they have 3 tokens, but the main token was Steam Power. So depending on kind of the purpose of your Web3 based network, you will have different incentive designs, how to incentivize the people to contribute to your Web3 based network.
Thank you for that. It's actually really inspiring to think about this like paradigm shift, right? And the essence of individualism and individuality. And I think we're seeing this. I'd love to go to this spot for a second. So Web3, blockchain, crypto, you got into it 8 years ago. It was born a few years before that, right? So well over a decade now. And with it, the birth of decentralized work, right? We have this thing called a DAO, which I'll have you talk about in a second. And in conjunction with what's happening in this Web3 revolution is this massive rise of hybrid and remote work. That trend was already happening pre-pandemic. The pandemic simply accelerated it. What gets me really excited is the sophistication that Web3 is going to bring to the future of work. So maybe if you could, let's talk about the future, 10 years, 20 years from now. What do you think building a company and working looks like in light of the Web3 revolution and hybrid work?
I think in order to be able to understand the future of work, we first need to understand the concept of DAOs. To understand DAOs, you have to understand Bitcoin. It really all started with Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin, first of all, the term DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. I think it was a term that I think might have been coined by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. I'm not quite sure, though.
Okay.
I have to research that. And he wrote a great deal, though, even if he didn't come up with the term, about decentralized organizations, decentralized autonomous organizations, the difference thereof, etc. Very often what we call decentralized autonomous organization is not that autonomous, but or maybe not that decentralized. It's being used very often to describe some kind of decentralized organization that operates on some kind of Web3 infrastructure, but it can be more or less, depending on the use case, it's very often more or less autonomous or grants more or less level of autonomy or co-creation possibilities to its members or its participants. And the power structures might be very off. How decentralized is a network if 90% of the network stakeholders only own 10% of the network, right, which is very often the case and has led to a downfall of many very interesting use cases, such as Steemit, which was one of the earliest decentralized applications out there. And it was a decentralized application that operated on a proper blockchain infrastructure. It was a decentralized social media application that intended to incentivize the contributors to the social media network, both the content creators and the curators, or people who liked content and evaluated the content with their likes, etc., with network tokens. The problem was that the design was a bit off. The kind of incentive design was off, because what was supposed to be a reputation token to give an indication of whether it's quality content or not could be bought with money or sold. You could delegate kind of your reputation tokens to a trading bot. So I think, unfortunately, at some point in 2016 and 17, it had more than 1 million users. I know people who could almost pay their rent with the Steam tokens that they earned just by creating social media content. But unfortunately, a lot of people abandoned it because the power structures, because of the kind of bad design of the incentive token, the reputation token, like later the rich got richer in the network, and it was really hard to earn network tokens as a newcomer. So people just stopped posting. But in general, to get back to the question, what's a decentralized autonomous organization? What's a DAO? It can be best explained with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin really was the first and probably the only real decentralized autonomous organization. We have many decentralized organizations, but Bitcoin is autonomous because and censorship resistant, and to a certain degree because its founder was never known. Founder has become, after a few years of co-contributing to the code creation of Bitcoin, or it went offline. We don't know who it was, whether it was one person or a group of people. And it's basically Bitcoin is a piece of code. The protocol is a piece of code that anyone can download and start running, operating a Bitcoin node and performing various different types of Bitcoin operations, contributing to the upkeep of the network, right? So it's autonomous because it's permissionless. Anyone can contribute, become a contributor without anyone else allowing them to become a contributor. So there is no censorship. Anyone can contribute to Bitcoin. You need to be able to afford the hardware. Nowadays, you can buy a stake in a mining pool, but it's in the end, it is permissionless and anyone can contribute this way and nobody can be censored. If any government would decide to ban Bitcoin, for example, let's say, I don't know, the US, anyone in another country would be able to operate a Bitcoin node and participate in the Bitcoin network and send Bitcoin tokens, except for American citizens, right? So it would take all 200 kind of governments worldwide to collude with each other and at the same time forbid Bitcoin, right? In order for Bitcoin to die. This is why we call it decentralized and autonomous organization. It's physically decentralized, geographically decentralized, permissionless, anyone can participate, and there is nobody you can censor, there's nobody you can throw in jail because we don't even know who the creator was. Now, for example, the Ethereum network is being criticized by many Bitcoiners, sometimes what they're called Bitcoin maxis, that Ethereum is not as decentralized because the founder is known, he is well respected, he has a lot of sway. Let's say people, like, if he says something, it influences code development more than what other contributors would do. Plus, there is like this foundation, the Ethereum Foundation, that has a lot of power over code development and strategy of the Ethereum network, which is why many decentralization advocates criticize the Ethereum network and many other similar blockchain networks, that they're not as decentralized as Bitcoin and not as autonomous as Bitcoin. But in the end, Web3 infrastructure and blockchains are the backbone of this infrastructure. And then there are a set of other collectively maintained protocols, file sharing protocols, that allow anyone to create a decentralized application with a few lines of code, and to create an incentive token to create some kind of decentralized organization where you can reward contributors to your organization or your network. I'd rather not say company, because I think there is a paradigm shift away from private infrastructure to public infrastructure. But anyone can define a purpose and create an organization, a network, incentivize people to collectively contribute to this purpose. Right? And with a network token. So these new organizations are, I would say, some kind of new non-state actor within this system of international relations, where you have 200 plus different nation states, jurisdictions, and then sub-jurisdictions. And then you have international organizations, and then you have their non-state actors, and then you have companies who are also non-state actors. And now we have a new type of non-state actors. These are these decentralized organizations that are more or less collectively maintained over Web3 infrastructure. And they can't be compared to companies. They have very often more similarities to nation states than to companies. Because the more decentralized and the more autonomous they are, and if they have a network token with which they incentivize kind of people to perform operations for the network, they have macroeconomic policies around this is the money of this distributed internet tribe. So there are monetary policy parameters tied to the creation rules of this network token. And you need to think about inflation, all that stuff. So these decentralized organizations cannot really be compared to companies. However, I would like to stress the term DAO, or decentralized organization even, is being very often misused. You have a private company that gives away tokens or creates some kind of decentralized organization with a private purpose and then pays people to do something with some network tokens, but it's still a private company running it, operating this application, right? You really have to look at the level of decentralization, the level of autonomy that contributors to that DAO, so-called DAO, have, and the level of control, the power structures behind that decentralized organization.
Sure. So in this thought, and thank you for that information on the DAO, we're definitely going to share that with the audience. There's this new non-state actor. There's this, right? So we have governments now, we have businesses. Typically the governments are creating regulations so the businesses don't get out of control. Now we have these decentralized non-state actors who, what I get excited about, can create a form of obligation versus regulation, right? Just by sheer numbers and power and influence, for instance, that a decentralized network could have. Could you maybe explain what implications do you think this has for companies? If we were to fast forward 25 years from now, what kind of influence will it have on business as we know it today and see it today?
It's really hard to forecast the future in detail, right? We can see trends though. And as you stated yourself previously, we've seen the internet over the last 30 years has already revolutionized work and company structures, right? We've seen power concentration around internet platforms that offer services for some kind of, let's say, gig economy. So we have this whole new possibility for people to become consumers as well as producers of goods and services, right? Whether it's goods that they sell on some e-commerce platform, or it's services that they sell on a gig economy platform where they sell services or offer services, or whether it's content that they provide to social media applications today, while they usually don't earn direct money on these social media networks, except for the music platforms, the video platforms, and other social media platforms. You don't have direct revenue streams, but as an influencer, you can get ad revenues and other kind of revenues. And so this has created completely new job types. This has fragmented the workforce. That was one thing. And the other trend that we've seen was the kind of remote work that is possible over the internet. And while it was possible even before the pandemic, thanks to the pandemic, we really saw there's very often system inertia just because companies had offices. And even though we had video conferencing tools before, like digital nomads were a fringe phenomenon before, but now digital nomads, it's like, I think the word doesn't make sense anymore because most people don't even go to the office anymore. So the internet has already disintermediated the workspace and workforce and created some kind of change the power structures. I think that Web3, and it's really hard to forecast, but
of course,
might create, I think in the best case, might empower the individual to become their own boss and to decide where to participate, to which decentralized organizations they would like to contribute their services, their infrastructure, or their sell goods, right? Yeah. So I could offer my services on a gig economy platform while also installing router or actually a hotspot, a helium hotspot, like buying a few helium hotspots that I install in my home and contributing to a collectively maintained telecommunication network by becoming a micro investor into telecommunication infrastructure and running these hotspots from my home. I might become a co-contributor to some mining operation for blockchain mining or blockchain staking, and at the same time offer services on a gig economy platform, and maybe also produce some goods that I sell online. And then I have my own company and I do my monthly taxes. I don't work for anyone. I work for myself and I decide what the balance of attention is that goes into the different goods and services that I offer over the internet. And probably the sites over which I offer those services or to which I contribute will be more and more collectively maintained and less privately maintained and dominated. So I think this is where the trend is going. However, the power structures that we have in the current internet, where we know the Gini coefficient, the coefficient, that economic parameter that tells us how wealth is distributed in a country. And unfortunately, in most countries, we're seeing that more and more, the richer are becoming more and more rich, while the poor are getting poorer and poorer, though thus having less influence on how we create these future networks in the economy. So now we have this opportunity that new structures are forming, but we're already seeing that very often so-called DAOs are very often not really decentralized, but the people who control the decentralized organization are often the founders, the initial founders, and the VCs who contributed money. In many cases, it's not the network participants that can co-contribute to the protocol upgrades, right? Whether or not we will have capitalism on steroids with a kind of a Web3 and a future token economy, or whether this token economy will allow us to redistribute wealth and reinvent wealth and collective value creation, that really depends on us a great deal. So I'm very thankful that you've been inviting me, or you invited me to the show, because in order to be able to contribute to a new type of economic co-creation, we need to understand what the Web3 is and how we can contribute to it, right? This
is borderlining on philosophy, right? And it's really interesting. I love to take new or progressive concepts. Web3 is still very early days. Think about what could be. It's really what we're talking about. Imagine what could happen. One of the things that even just the pandemic has shown us is that businesses are so unprepared to create a sense of culture and high performance through a distributed nature, right? And then we can look at Web3 and be like, it's happening autonomously. You've talked about incentives, and of course there's monetary incentives, but philosophically, there's another incentive here. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about, there's some shared value system happening here. What is the incentive? What is the hope of this decentralization?
If we go down the philosophy rabbit hole, it's going to take quite long, but
we'll just keep it brief.
So I guess the initial idea of decentralization that started with Bitcoin was that the people who started the ideas around peer-to-peer electronic cash and really financial cryptography and monetary autonomy tried to A, be independent of state actors, B, create more institutional accountability, create some kind of new institution that's independent from nation states. And Bitcoin was very successful, and everyone who contributed over the decades to the co-creation of everything that led to Bitcoin, they really successfully created this infrastructure that is a new non-state actor. However, this new non-state actors, Bitcoin network, Ethereum network, and any other DAO that builds on top of these blockchain networks, they are a new type of institution. They wanted to get rid of the old institutions, but we created new institutions. And these institutions are always, somebody has to write the protocol rules. Somebody has to decide upon the upgrades, protocol upgrades, right? If the Bitcoin network wants to update the way, become more scalable or more private, the rules need to be amended, and then everyone in the network needs to agree to it, right? Or you need some kind of majority consensus. And this is where it gets messy, because this is when politics starts all over again. So what I think Bitcoin wanted to abolish by having like the theory of code is law, like we create this protocol and then everyone knows what the rules are and everything is transparent, because in blockchain networks, there is this accountability. Everyone can use a block explorer and see what happened. This is great, right? But nobody thought of, what if we ever need to maintain, update the protocol? And when you're not in a niche anymore, it's not 5 people working on this, but it becomes millions of people who are stakeholders in this network. Then it starts to become messy, because then you have power structures, then you have people who start forming parties around this idea, how to update the protocol, and this idea, how to operate the protocol. And then you see the Twitter wars between the different people who have the different ideas, even within the Bitcoin network. Like the last protocol update, it was like a power struggle over 2 to 3 years, right? The scalability, Bitcoin scalability wars, and we're having the next protocol up right now. I think the reality very often gets in the way of the ideals, right?
Sure.
However, what remains, I think, of the initial idea of Bitcoin is that we have a more, with Web3, collectively maintained internet, where we have more institutional transparency and accountability. But we don't get rid of the human problem, because people have different opinions and they have to agree on the same path forward. And this is when politics starts and becomes messy. And so I think we should just understand these networks on the intersection of technology, but the technology, how we create this technology, how we update these networks always depends on us, right? And whether we have a good culture on discussing, being able to tolerate different opinions. It's a sociological, it's a human problem. It has more to do with psychology and sociology and less with technology.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that it's creating new job types, right? And let's talk about the next generation of workers. What kinds of skills, competencies do you think will be coveted in the future as we integrate a more decentralized, a more democratized world with Web3?
I basically think that, and it's already been true for past iterations of the internet, what we're being taught in school is so outdated. It has nothing to do with the realities of the economy and the internet and how the world works, right? We lack tech savviness, we lack financial education, we lack so many things. We're not being taught so many things. And the school system still teaches us as if the internet was never invented, as if we would actually have to run to the library, right? It's, instead of empowering us to understand how to use the internet, to be able to learn what we need and where our talents are and how, and adapt to an ever faster evolving technological environment, we're still being taught as if we were at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It's 2023, and most countries of this world don't teach coding to their students. How is that possible? We learn math. We still learn Latin in some countries, but we don't learn, like from kindergarten, like basic code principles. So how can I contribute to the betterment of AI or improve AI systems? Or how can I contribute to improving blockchain protocols if I don't even know how to write hello world in HTML, right? And this is one of the problems we have, is that the educational system, starting with kindergarten and ending with university, does not teach us what we need to know, that when we leave university or when we leave high school, that we have actually the skills that we need to participate in democracy and participate in as a member of the workforce, as you call it. I think the concept of citizen and workforce member merges over the internet. It's like, why is it two different things? I'm the same person. Why are you trying to create a bipolar person out of me? Because this is one of the perils of capitalism. It's like, here you're a citizen and here you're a member of the workforce. No, I don't want to be a member of the workforce. I want to own the capital. Right? Don't make me a subhuman by making me a member of the workforce. I want to own my own time. I want to own my own assets and decide where I put my time and how I invest my assets. And this is the potential power of Web3. By becoming a co-creator to different blockchain networks and decentralized applications that build on top of it, I can contribute with code, I can contribute with my time and attention to do other tasks in different types of networks. I can get paid in some kind of asset tokens that I can convert for other asset tokens. I can get access rights for stuff. I can get reputation that helps me for other things, or I can just do it for the betterment of society, as open source code development also works. Theoretically, that is what we can do. If it works out well, it can go down that path. However, there is a danger. Technology is just a tool, and how we use it depends on us, right? So blockchain networks can become freedom machines, but they can also become control machines if we don't have the right privacy by design. And also, like these incentives, like tokenization as an incentive to steer by individuals towards a kind of the maintenance of a public good, is a very good idea in theory, but many people criticize and think there could be a danger in only doing stuff for money, only contributing to public goods for money. So I myself, I'm a bit critical about this too, because I saw the open source revolution and the revolution around contributing to creating open source code for free just because it's the right thing to do, because most code that was written in the early 1990s was privatized and nobody else could use it. So there was this whole movement of open source code, of the Creative Commons. I create something and everyone can build on top of it. Doing things for free is also important. So where is the balance? How do we create these incentive structures that we're not becoming, we don't create a system which is capitalism on steroids. And this is why I write my book, because I'm trying to distinguish the different properties tokens can have. And if you tie certain reputation tokens or even money tokens to the identity of a person, so they cannot be transferred, you create a different type of monetary system. Or if you create money that cannot be hoarded because it expires after a certain time or it loses value, it has some kind of demurrage to it. This prevents excessive hoarding, and it prevents like the power structures where the rich become richer, is because the people who have a lot of money, they can get interest on giving other people money, and they become over the decades, and with like generational wealth, the rich become richer, right? But if we had a monetary system where we would build in some demurrage into the money, the fact that if you don't spend the money within a certain period, it loses value, then people are incentivized to spend the money rather than hoard the money. But this is like, and tokenization theoretically allows us to create any type of monetary policy or money system that we want, and not necessarily the type of money that we are used to. the money that can be excessively hoarded. And so the future really depends on so many factors, what path like the collective will go down.
Exactly. Absolutely. One thing we talk about on this show is how performance measurement inside companies as a business society, it's woefully unsophisticated, especially as we shift our reliance on humans for their more human abilities. There's some measures to measure personality or competence, right? But we lack the correlation to the business output. This is a trend that we're going to have to fix over the next few years as we shift our reliance on humans to be more humans away from machines, right? We're relying on machines to be more transactional. Each business is different. You take a product manager in a software business in the same industry at one company, and you look at their direct competitor, product manager, they're measured completely differently, expectations, salary. And what this is, it's limiting for the individual, because when they go from one company to the next, they essentially have to start over again and learn the system, the ecosystem that exists inside that business. What I get excited about Web3 is it introduces the notion of portability of data owned by the individual. So imagine if I was a product manager and there was a performance standard that you could fill my profile with. It's my packet and I'm plugged into you while I'm working for you and you fill it and it's validated. And now I can go to my next company. That's mine. And now I can put that on the open market and say, how much am I worth? What skills do I need? How does that change? That's something that it triggered even just reading your book. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's potential here to revolutionize and continue this independence revolution. Yeah, you talk about smart cities, smart ecosystems. I know this, in a way, I'm like, oh, could this introduce the notion of a smart business? So what are your thoughts on Web3's potential to accelerate this performance portability conversation?
So as for performance portability, this is not my area of expertise. I thought of it. It's hard for me to tell. What is sure is because of the new data structures in Web3, if we combine blockchain network with self-sovereign identity, user-centric identity systems, where my personal data is always stored by me, it's just validated, or the credentials are validated by the people who worked with me or who gave me diplomas.
Yes.
But I basically have my wallet. In my wallet, I have my tokens, and they can represent assets, or they can represent my diplomas, or they can represent my work history or my browser history. But I control the data. And nobody has insight into the data. They can just validate that certain things are true or not without exactly knowing. For example, validating if I'm old enough or not, if I have a driver's license or not, but they will never know how old I am unless I want to reveal it with them. Or whether or not I worked for a certain company, they don't have to call them up. Or as just happened with me, an ex-coworker or somebody who worked with me, I get like this email from the HR company and I have to open an attachment with a Word document. I'm like, I don't use Microsoft. What is this? And so they had to send me another email and copy paste it into the email. And then I'm like, yes, this person worked for me. Yes, this is true. But in Web3, once these self-sovereign attestations and credentials become a bit more sophisticated, because we're still in the very early stages, this just makes it my personal credentials more portable. I really don't know what this would mean for the workforce. I have to say, this is where we need to discuss, because I've never thought of it. HR and workforce management are not something that I think about. I don't think it's revolutionary. I think it's like SAP. It's very convenient. Data becomes more portable. You're more sovereign. It could also bear some threats, right? If somebody gave you a really bad evaluation on something, you can never get rid of it. I don't know. How do you handle credentials that an ex-boss gave you about the performance you did in your job that is not really based on how you personally perceive your contributions to the job, but maybe there was some resentment that people had in your prior job and they evaluated you wrongly, or what's the truth, right? There's always two perspectives to one thing, but people are messy, personal resentment. So we have to be very careful how we design these attestation systems that would be relevant for the workforce. I think I would need to think much more about it before I can really give a qualified answer. But I think we need to think about the threats much more than the potentials in this case.
Okay. I like that.
For example, what is being revealed in these systems is very important. And how is it being revealed? And when does reputation expire? Just because I fucked up 20 years ago or did something 20 years ago that I would never do now, I'm a different person 20 years later. Do I carry this in my personal portfolio of credentials and everyone can see it in every future job? For example, like according to the rule of law, and it's different in different countries, but even if there are police records, they expire after a while, depending on the type of record that you had with the police, offense that you might have done, depending on your age that you do it and the type of the maybe criminal offense. It expires after a while that the records have to be deleted, right? If we think about these credential-based systems for the workforce, we need to account for these kind of measures as well, because people change. And just because, and it goes both ways, just because I had really good performance 10, 20 years ago, I can be, for physical or psychological reasons, I could be a lousy workforce member, to use your words, right? Maybe I took too many drugs and I'm now like somewhere off there, like partially bipolar, right? Just because I performed well 20 years ago, it doesn't mean that I perform well now.
Of course.
So this is what we need to account for.
Yes. Yep. This has been awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Are there any parting words or anything else you'd like to share with the audience? I think just educate yourself. What I can share with the audience, Web3 is a thing, whether we will keep calling it Web3 or not, but this technological revolution that Bitcoin started and tokenization, it is a thing. And it's a thing, it's not a standalone thing. Web3 is not a standalone technology. It works on the intersection. It intersects with everything, like with algorithms and AI and the Internet of Things. So it really, while it's not a standalone thing, you have to understand this thing for itself also. And it will be the intersection of Web3, blockchain networks, Web3 and tokenization with intelligent algorithms. Today, everybody is talking about ChatGPT and GPT-4 and whatever, these new GPTs that are coming out day by the day. Because currently we're writing the constitutional computation by hand. It's like people deciding, if this happens, then the code will do this. And if this happens, the code will do this. For example, stable tokens, right? So if tokens, payment tokens that should maintain a price stability, they have monetary policy parameters that are very much based on how we would conduct monetary policy in the 20th century before we had computers and data, right? But if we combine stable tokens with algorithms that can be much more adaptive, because it's an AI-based algorithm, can take in all the data of what happens in the entire economic landscape and create more sophisticated stability mechanisms. This is very interesting. This intersection between AI and tokenization, this is something that will become more and more relevant in the future. And the intersection between tokenization or Web3 and what we used to call or still call IoT, right? In order for machines and supply chain, goods along the supply chain to participate in the Web3, in order to have more transparency over what happens in the supply chain, we need to give physical identities to objects in the supply chain and machines. So educate yourself, try and understand the technology as a standalone thing, but also in intersection with other technologies. Love that. Brilliant. Thank you, Shermin. Greatly appreciate it.